The night Nam Gyong-tae decided to have a 12-year-old boy snatched off a school playground. He did it over lunch. Sat there in his private dining room on the 14th floor of the Baek Do-yun Tower, cutting beef into neat little squares, and told the man across the table to make it clean. No marks on the kid, just enough fear to be useful. He said it the same way a man might order his steak medium rare. No hesitation, no flicker of anything behind his eyes. Just instruction, then another bite of food. The man across the table nodded and left. Jung-tae poured himself more tea. And somewhere across Seattle, a boy named Cameron Bellamy was still in school, laughing at something stupid, his friend said, completely unaware that his life had just become a chess piece in a war he didn't even know existed. If you were Zuri Bellamy, what would you do? If you found out that the quiet man you'd been falling for, the one who made you feel seen for the first time in 4 years, had dragged your nephew into something so dark you couldn't even name it? Would you run? Would you stay? Would you even survive it? Before you find out if this kind of story hits you, somewhere real, somewhere in that place where you know life doesn't always hand people what they deserve, subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button and drop your city and country in the comments right now, because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about power, about love, and about what ordinary people are actually capable of when everything they love is on the line. The bus was late. That was the first thing, and it was such a small, stupid thing that Zuri almost laughed when she thought about it later. The whole trajectory of her life shifted on a Tuesday evening in November because the Route 7 bus was 11 minutes behind schedule and she was too tired to walk to the next stop. She stood at the shelter with her grocery bags cutting into her fingers, 2 canvas totes stuffed with the cheapest protein she could find, a bag of apples because Cameron would eat an entire bag in 3 days if she let him, and 3 damaged children's books she'd brought home from the library to read on her own time because the slides had been cut again, and she wasn't going to let a torn copy of Charlotte's Web sit on a shelf looking like it had survived a natural disaster. Her feet hurt, both of them. The left one more than the right because the sole of her left shoe had separating from the upper sometime around 2 in the afternoon, and she'd been walking slightly wrong ever since, trying to compensate, and now her whole left leg ached from the knee down. She was 30 years old, and her left leg ached like she was 60. The bus finally arrived in a cloud of diesel exhaust and wet pavement smell, and she hauled herself up the steps, swiped her card, and found the only empty seat left, aisle seat, middle of the bus, next to a woman who immediately pulled her coat tighter and looked out the window like Zuri might try to talk to her. Zuri didn't try to talk to her. She set the grocery bags between her feet and leaned her head against the metal seat and closed her eyes for exactly 30 seconds. That was her version of rest these days. 30 seconds of darkness. Then back to whatever was next. What was next was dinner. Then checking Cameron's homework. A sound. Then an hour of book repair at the kitchen table while he did whatever 12-year-old boys did when they thought their guardians weren't watching. Then bed by 11 if she was lucky, up again at 6:15. She'd been running this schedule for 4 years. 4 years, 2 months, and some days she didn't count anymore because counting made it feel like a sentence instead of a life she'd chosen. Her sister Amara had been 27 when the accident happened. Her brother-in-law Dion had been 31. They'd been driving back from a weekend trip, just the two of them, a rare overnight away from Cameron, because Zuri had offered to watch him. She thought she was doing something nice, giving them a break, giving herself a night with her nephew, who she adored, who was 7 at the time, and still small enough to fall asleep in her lap during movies. She hadn't known it was the last gift she'd ever give them. Cameron had cried every night for 6 months. She'd heard him through the wall of the apartment she'd found too fast, the kind of fast that meant she hadn't negotiated the lease properly and was still paying too much for it. She'd heard him, and she'd gone in every time, sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and just stayed there until the sounds stopped. She didn't have a manual for any of it. She didn't have parents who could help. Her mother had died. When she was 22, her father had been gone before that. She had a small circle of friends who helped when they could, a supervisor at the library named Beverly who quietly gave her the good scheduling, and an overdue credit card bill she kept in the kitchen drawer so Cameron wouldn't accidentally see it. The bus filled up at the next stop. Standing passengers. Bodies pressing into the aisle. Zuri shifted her grocery bags and looked up. Across the aisle diagonally, one row ahead, a man in a black coat. She noticed him the way you notice something slightly wrong in a familiar picture. Not because he was striking, though he was, in that exhausted, quietly dangerous way some men carry, but because he was completely unnervingly still in a bus full of movement. Everyone else was on their phone, talking, adjusting, fidgeting with the discomfort of a crowded public bus. This man sat with his hands in his lap and stared straight ahead, and there was something so controlled about it that it almost looked like effort. He was maybe 40 Korean, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept properly in longer than one night. His coat was good, she registered that in the automatic way. A woman who can't afford good things learns to identify them real wool, well cut, soaked through across the shoulders from the rain. He didn't look dangerous. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who'd had a very bad day at the end of a very long string of bad days and was now sitting on a city bus at 8:15 in the evening, trying to hold himself together through sheer will. Then his stomach growled, not subtle about it, loud enough that the woman beside Zuri glanced over, then immediately away. The man in the black coat didn't react, just kept staring straight ahead. Like he'd learned to be embarrassed by nothing. Zuri looked down at her lap. She had in her canvas tote one turkey sandwich she'd made at 6 this morning before leaving for work. She'd been saving it for the bus ride home because she hadn't had time to eat during her shift and she hadn't wanted to spend money at the cafe near the library, even though the smell of their soup had nearly broken her at noon. It was wrapped in a paper napkin, not even a proper sandwich bag. She'd used the last of them on Cameron's lunch. She looked at the sandwich. She looked at the man. She'd spent 4 years calculating exactly what she could and couldn't give away. Every extra dollar going somewhere, Cameron's school field trip, a new pair of shoes when his old one split, the heating bill when January came and she had to choose. She'd learned to be precise about generosity because carelessness with it got you into trouble. But there was something about the way he was sitting. Not performing hunger, not hoping to be noticed, just sitting with it, the way people who are used to managing alone sit with things. She unwrapped the sandwich, tore it in half along a rough line, stood up enough to lean across the aisle. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. Up close, his eyes were darker than she'd expected. Careful, like they were always calculating distance. "You look like you need this more than I do." She held out the half sandwich. He didn't take it immediately. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, that felt longer than it was. Like he was trying to figure out what the angle was, what she wanted, whether this was something he needed to be suspicious of. I know you don't need it," she said. "I'm not saying you need it. I'm saying you look hungry and I have extra." It wasn't extra. They both probably knew it wasn't extra. He took it. "Thank you," he said. His English was precise. Careful in the way people who've learned a language thoroughly are careful with it. "Don't mention it," Zuri said, and meant it literally, and settled back into her seat and ate her half of the sandwich and stared out the window at the wet Seattle night sliding past. She didn't ask his name. He didn't offer it. The bus rolled on. His name was Baek Do-yun. He was 41 years old. He ran a legitimate international shipping company called Baek Do-yun Pacific that operated out of 4 West Coast port cities and employed over 300 people who had absolutely no idea that the holding company above their legitimate employer was the infrastructure backbone of the most quietly powerful Korean-American criminal organization on the Pacific. He had a penthouse on the 40th floor of a building overlooking Elliott Bay. He had 4 vehicles, a personal security team that rotated in 8-hour shifts, and an art collection that a Sotheby's consultant had valued 18 months ago at something north of $4 million. He had all of this, and he'd been eating nothing since 6 that morning because the meeting he'd expected to last 40 minutes had lasted 9 hours, and somewhere in the middle of hour 6, someone had tried to kill him. Not metaphorically, not as a threat or a warning, an actual attempt. His car, his route home, a device that had been placed with the kind of precision that told him whoever had done it knew his schedule from the inside. His driver had spotted the anomaly by chance, a wire that shouldn't have been there. Noticed because the man had once spent 3 years doing exactly this kind of work, before Do-yun had offered him legitimate employment and a salary that made that old life look like amateur theater. They'd abandoned the car on the street, and Do-yun had taken a city bus for the first time in probably 15 years. And a woman with grocery bags and a torn shoe had given him half her sandwich because he looked hungry. He sat in his penthouse later that night, stripped of the wet coat, showered, dressed in clean clothes that felt somehow strange after the day he'd had. And he held the paper napkin from the sandwich and tried to explain to himself why he couldn't throw it away. Men had offered him million-dollar deals. Men had pledged loyalty with their hands on things they considered sacred. His own underboss had once told him he would die for him, which Do-yun had believed at the time, and which he now understood had always been the kind of thing people say when they want you to believe it rather than when they mean it. Nobody had given him something, simply, because they thought he needed it. Nobody. Seok-jin arrived at 11. Yoon Seok-jin had been with Do-yun for 14 years. He was 52, careful, methodical, and constitutionally incapable of softening bad news because he'd learned early in his career that soft delivery of bad news still produced the same bad news, just with extra steps. Do-yun trusted him more than anyone alive, which was still a fairly qualified trust. The device in the car wasn't purchased externally, Seok-jin said. Supply chain traces back to materials we manage internally. Someone inside. Yes. Do-yun set the napkin on the table beside him. Jong-tae? Seok-jin was quiet for a moment. The evidence doesn't name him yet. But the positioning does. Nam Gyeong-tae had been Do-yun's underboss for 8 years. He was 46 heavyset, with a smooth social exterior that had always made him effective in rooms full of people who needed to feel comfortable. He was also, Do-yun had sensed for some months now, operating on an ambition that had quietly outgrown his position. He won't move fast, Do-yun said. He's a methodical man. That's what worries me, Seok-jin said. After Seok-jin left, Do-yun stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the lights on the water. The bay was black and restless in the rain. He thought about the woman on the bus. He thought about the way she'd just held out the sandwich without fanfare. Without explanation, like sharing the only food she had with a stranger was just something you did when someone needed it. He didn't know her name. He asked Seok-jin to find out the next morning. The report came back in 36 hours. Zuri Bellamy, age 30, employed full-time in children's services at the Rainier Central Library with a secondary evening position at a small independent bookstore called Passage Books near Capitol Hill. She had been the sole guardian of her nephew, Cameron Bellamy, 12, for 4 years following the death of his parents in an automobile accident. Her finances were tight, not catastrophically so, but tight in the grinding way that didn't leave room for emergencies or deviation. She had no criminal history, no civil judgments, no social media presence, beyond a small account she used mostly to share reading recommendations for children. She had, according to 3 separate interviews Seok-jin's people conducted under entirely false pretexts, a reputation in her community that was almost frustrating in its consistency. She waived late fees for families she knew were struggling. She repaired damaged books with her own supplies on her own time. She had twice in the past year quietly covered replacement fees for children who'd lost books so they wouldn't be barred from borrowing. She organized a monthly reading program for children in a nearby hospital ward. She had gone to a food bank once, 6 months ago, during a period when Cameron's school expenses had in the same week as a heating repair. She had not told anyone. She had gone early in the morning when she thought fewer people would be there, and she'd been visibly uncomfortable accepting help. The woman who'd checked her in had mentioned it. Do-yun read this report 3 times. Then he drove to the Rainier Central Library on a Wednesday afternoon and walked inside. He used the name Daniel Baek told the librarian at the front desk, a young woman who barely looked up from her screen, that he was a shipping logistics consultant new to the neighborhood. He was browsing. He found Zuri in the children's section. She was in the middle of story hour. 12 kids, ages maybe 5 through 9, arranged in a rough semicircle on a rug that had probably been donated given its vintage. She was reading The Phantom Toll Booth, which was, Do-yun thought, a somewhat ambitious choice for the younger end of that age group. She didn't read it the way someone going through the motions reads. She did voices. Different, distinct, slightly ridiculous voices that made the kids squirm with delight. When she got to a funny part, she didn't break and laugh with them, she held it, stayed in the story, let have the moment. Only in the corner of her mouth was there anything that suggested she was enjoying this as much as they were. Do-yun stood at the edge of the children's section and pretended to examine a display shelf and watched her for 22 minutes. He came back the following Wednesday, and the one after that. By the third visit, she recognized him. "You're the sandwich guy," she said. She was resolving books with a speed and efficiency that suggested she'd done it approximately 10,000 times. "I'm sorry? The bus. About a month ago." She glanced at him with something that wasn't quite amusement but was adjacent to it. "Turkey sandwich. You ate the whole half." "I was hungry," he said. "Yeah, I know. That was the point." She shelved another book without looking at him. "You're here a lot for someone who's browsing. I like this library. Most people like the main branch. Bigger collection. I like this one," he said. She looked at him then. Straight assessment, unhurried, the look of someone who'd developed the ability to read people out of necessity rather than curiosity. "Daniel," he said, and held out his hand. "Zuri," she said, and shook it. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He brought no agenda, no orchestrated moments. He sat in the reading room near the windows and read genuinely, because there was nothing else to do in a library except read or pretend to. He checked out novels. She raised an eyebrow at his first selection, a dense Cormac McCarthy, and said, "Bold choice for light reading," and he returned them and checked out others. They talked in the way you talk in a library, quietly, in short intervals between her responsibilities. She told him about Cameron. Not the weight of it, not the sacrifice and the grief and the bills in the kitchen drawer, but Cameron himself. The specifics of him. His current obsession was robotics. He'd found a YouTube channel run by a mechanical engineer in Portland and had started talking about mechanical engineering with the intensity of someone who'd discovered a religion. "He builds things," she said, in a tone that managed to communicate enormous pride and mild domestic anxiety simultaneously. "Out of whatever's available. Last week, it was a sorting mechanism made of cardboard and rubber bands. I don't know what it sorted. I was afraid to ask." Do-yun laughed. It was a sound that surprised him slightly when it came out. He hadn't laughed, not genuinely, without calculation, in longer than he could accurately remember. "Smart kid," he said. "Terrifyingly smart kid," she said. "Which is mostly wonderful, and occasionally a problem." He watched her work. Her notice a boy of about 7, sitting alone in a corner, with a book he clearly wasn't reading, just holding it like a prop. She excused herself from the conversation without drama, walked over, crouched down to the boy's eye level, and spoke quietly. Within 4 minutes, the boy was resolving books beside her, visibly pleased to have something to do. She didn't make it a big moment. She just handled it. Then she came back and picked up the conversation exactly where they'd left it. Do-yun thought about the way he handled problems, the resources he deployed, the number of people it took to manage situations that this woman navigated alone, with nothing but her attention and her instinct. The efficiency of her was remarkable. The kindness of it was something else entirely. The gala was in February. Zuri told him about it on a Thursday afternoon, with the flattened enthusiasm of someone who had mixed feelings about an obligation. The Northwest Children's Literacy Gala was an annual fundraiser at the Harborview Hotel. Expensive ticket, formal dress, the kind of event where foundations were courted and grants were discussed over canapés. Her library's director had pulled strings to get her a seat at the table. She was supposed to represent the Rainier program. Make the case for funding. You don't want to go, Do-yun said. I want the funding, she said precisely. Those are not the same thing. Why don't you want to go? She was quiet for a moment, resolving, without looking at him. Because I'll be the person in the borrowed dress, said a table full of people who've never had to think about whether they can afford shampoo. And I'll have to smile and be interesting and make them feel good about giving money to children they'll never meet. And I'm tired, she said the last word flatly, without self-pity. Just as information. Will you go anyway? Obviously, she said. The kids need the funding. He was already attending. He'd accepted the invitation 3 months prior, before any of this, because the gala's host hit organization had shipping connections he maintained through legitimate channels. He didn't tell her that. He arrived late to the gala deliberately. His timing was calculated in the way all his movements were calculated. Though the calculation in this case was simpler than his usual work, he'd wanted to see how she was managing before he intervened, if intervention was even needed. He spotted her from across the room. She was standing near the edge of a cluster of people near the bar, wearing a navy dress that was elegant in the straightforward way. Things are when they're chosen well rather than expensively. She was holding a glass of water, not wine, and her expression was the face of a person who is very much present and also very much ready to leave. And then a woman, expensive hair. The confidence of someone who had never in her adult life been ignored in a room, looked Zuri up and down with the slow deliberateness of someone who wants to make sure inspection is noticed, and said something. Do-yun was too far away to hear it, but he saw Zuri's jaw tighten. He saw her pull herself very straight. He saw her not respond, which he understood immediately was harder than responding would have been. He moved through the room. People turned when he entered spaces. Spent years not noticing it because it was simply his reality. But tonight he felt it consciously, the ripple of recognition, the slight adjustment of bodies. Politicians and executives beginning to orient toward him the way certain plants orient toward light. He ignored all of them. He walked directly to Zuri. You came, she said, and then stopped, because she'd said it with the warmth you use. With someone you're glad to see, and then she caught herself. Because Daniel Baek was just a regular library patron, and library patrons don't typically appear at formal galas. I was already invited, he said. Then more quietly, are you all right? Fine, she said, which meant she wasn't, and they both knew it. Do-yun reached into his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying the napkin for weeks. He didn't fully understand why. It wasn't sentiment exactly, or it was, but not the soft kind. It was more like evidence. Proof of something he was still working out how to name. He unfolded it. It was wrinkled, clearly old, the kind of thing that had no business being in an expensive hotel ballroom. He held it up. Before I say what I'm about to say, he said, I want you to know I'm aware this is going to be strange. Zuri stared at the napkin. Is that the... Yes. She stared at him. He turned slightly, not dramatically, not theatrical, just enough that his voice carried into the cluster of people nearby. The people who had watched the other woman mock Zuri 10 minutes ago and said nothing. This is the napkin from a turkey sandwich, he said clearly, conversationally, as if explaining something simple. The greatest gift I've received in the past decade. Given to me by a woman on a city bus who didn't know my name, didn't want anything from me, and split the only food she had because she thought I needed it more than she did. Cluster of people had gone quiet. She works in a library, he continued. She spends her days giving children access to stories they might not otherwise find. See, and she does it with the budget that would make most people in this room embarrassed to admit they've complained about their own resources. He looked at Zuri. Her expression was complicated, somewhere between mortified and something she couldn't quite suppress. Her name is Zuri Bellamy, he said, and her library program deserves every dollar this room can offer. He folded the napkin carefully and put it back in his pocket. Then he picked up a glass from a passing tray and raised it slightly. The woman with the expensive hair, somewhere in the cluster, had gone very still. The donations that came in over the next hour were, Zuri told him later, enough to fund the mobile library initiative for an entire year. She said it standing near the coat check, retrieving her jacket, with the slightly dazed quality of someone still processing. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, don't. She stopped. Started again. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. She looked at him. Careful, straight look. Who are you? She asked. Not accusing, genuinely asking. Daniel Baek, he said. She didn't say anything, but she looked at him like she already knew that wasn't quite the whole answer. From the mezzanine above, Nam Gyong-tae had watched the entire thing. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, and he hadn't touched it since Do-yun had crossed the ballroom floor. He'd watched his boss walk past 12 people who wanted his attention and go directly to a woman in a borrowed dress near the bar. He'd watched the napkin. He'd watched the ballroom shift. Gyong-tae was a methodical man. He had been patient for 11 months. The money he'd diverted was positioned correctly. The captains he'd recruited were solid. Timeline he'd built was clean and conservative. He had been waiting for a lever. Something Do-yun would move for without thinking. Something that would bypass the careful, controlled intelligence of the man and reach whatever was underneath it. He'd spent 11 months looking for that lever. Now he watched Do-yun fold a paper napkin back into his pocket like it was something precious. Gyong set his whiskey down. He'd found it. 3 days after the gala, Gyong-tae called a meeting that wasn't on any calendar. He used the private room above the Hongkong restaurant in the International District, a room that didn't exist on the building's official floor plan, accessed through a kitchen corridor that smelled permanently of garlic and fry oil. He'd used it for 11 months of careful, patient construction. He'd chosen it specifically because Do-yun had never set foot in it. 4 men arrived within 20 minutes of each other. Captains, technically, though that word meant something more specific and less romantic in Baek Do-yun's operational structure than it did in the movies. They managed territories. They controlled distribution channels. They had, over the past 11 months, been quietly moved from Do-yun's direct orbit into something that looked, from the outside, like routine organizational restructuring. Gyong-tae poured no drinks. He didn't believe in lubricating difficult conversations. You all saw the gala coverage, he said. One of the men, Park Sung-woo, 40, who ran the Tacoma port operations, shifted in his chair. The woman Gyong-tae confirmed. Another man, Lim Chae-won, said nothing. He was the cautious one of the 4, which Gyong-tae respected, but also found mildly irritating at moments like this. Do-yun hasn't been distracted in 14 years, Gyong-tae said. Not by a deal, not by a threat, not by anything that wasn't directly in front of him and demanding immediate response. He paused. He carried a paper napkin in his jacket pocket to a formal event and made a speech about a turkey sandwich. Silence. He's a man, Sung-woo said finally, with the tone of someone pointing out something obvious. He's been a man for 41 years, Gyong-tae said. This is new. He didn't explain his plan in full that night. He wasn't the kind of man who explained plans in full until the pieces were already moving. What he told them was simpler. He wanted information. Everything available about Zuri Bellamy. Her schedule, her routines, her connections, the boy she was raising. Not to be acted on immediately, just to be known. Information was the first move. Always. Lim Chae-won spoke for the first time. And if Do-yun finds out, we're looking at her. Gyong-tae picked up his phone from the table and slid it into his pocket. Then we'll know his surveillance on us is better than I estimated, he said, which would also be useful information. He left first. On the street outside, the February rain had turned to something between mist and nothing, that particular Seattle ambiguity about precipitation that locals stopped noticing after their first winter. Gyong-tae walked to his car alone, which he preferred. He did his best thinking in the small, quiet intervals between things. He was not, despite what people sometimes assumed about men in his position, motivated by hatred. He didn't hate Do-yun. He'd worked alongside him for 8 years and found him, on balance, to be a man of considerable intelligence and occasional genuine integrity, which in their world was rarer than most people admitted. But Do-yun was an obstacle. Specifically, he was the obstacle between Baek Do-yun's current structure and what Gyong-tae had spent a decade building toward in his own mind, a leaner, more aggressive organization that didn't hedge its criminal operations behind the slow conservatism of legitimate business management. Do-yun had built Baek Do-yun to last. Jeong-tae wanted to build it to win. These were not compatible visions. He got in his car and told his driver to take him home, and he sat in the sex seat and thought about a woman in a navy dress and a man who'd crossed a ballroom full of powerful people to stand beside her, and he understood, with the calm precision of someone who'd spent his adult life finding points of leverage, that he had just found the only thing in Do-yun's life that Do-yun had not yet thought to protect. Zuri didn't tell Cameron about the gala donations right away. She came home that night, paid the sitter, a teenager from the floor above who charged $11 an hour and was worth every an hour and was worth a penny, and stood in the kitchen for a few minutes just breathing. Cameron was asleep. She could hear nothing from his room, which meant he'd actually slept instead of reading unders with a flashlight, which happened more often than she officially acknowledged. She made tea she didn't drink and sat at the table with the overdue bill she kept in the drawer, and she looked at it. And she thought about the number Beverly had texted her at the end of the evening, the total donations designated specifically for the Rainier Literacy Program. It was more money than she made in a year. She sat with that for a while. Then she thought about Daniel Baek standing in the middle of that ballroom, holding a crumpled paper napkin and talking about a turkey sandwich, and she felt something shift in her chest in a way that she immediately pushed back down because it was midnight, and she was not in a position to start feeling things about a man she'd known for 6 weeks. She was not in a position for that at all. She put the bill back in the drawer. She was in bed by 1 and awake by 6:15, and life continued exactly as it had before, except that 2 days later she got a call from Beverly confirming the donations were real and designated, and she sat in the break room of the library and pressed her knuckles against her mouth for 30 seconds before she pulled herself together and went back to work. Do-yun found the surveillance on the 3rd day. Not surveillance of himself, he had systems for that. Seok-jin's people ran counter-surveillance as a matter of routine and had for years. What he found, buried in a report that Seok-jin delivered on a Friday morning, was a flag. Someone had run a search on Zuri Bellamy through channels that were theoretically internal to Baek Do-yun. The search had been careful, indirect, run through 3 proxy queries that were individually innocuous. But Seok-jin had been in this work for a long time, and he had the particular intelligence of a man who knew how information moved inside an organization because he'd spent 14 years managing exactly that movement. He set the report on Do-yun's desk without comment, pointed to the relevant section. Do-yun read it twice. When, he said. 3 days ago. The night after the gala. Do-yun set the report down. He looked at the window. Elliott Bay was gray this morning, the kind of gray that didn't suggest weather so much as mood. Source? He said. Not confirmed yet. The routing suggests someone who knows our internal architecture well. Jeong-tae. Seok-jin was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. The evidence doesn't need to yet, Do-yun said. He stood up. What does he know? Public record, mostly. Employment, address, the nephew. The gala connection will be easy to establish from press coverage alone. Do-yun was quiet. What Jeong-tae had found, what anyone looking would find, was a woman with no protection. No resources beyond what she could earn herself. A 12-year-old boy and a borrowed dress and an overdue bill she thought no one else knew about. She can't know, Do-yun said. Seok-jin looked at him carefully. She's already connected to you publicly. The gala coverage included her name. That's social coverage, charity coverage. Do-yun moved to the window. She doesn't know what I am. As long as she doesn't know what I am, she's just a librarian who received a donation. There's no story there for anyone to use. Seok-jin said nothing for a moment. Then, and if Jeong-tae decides to change that, Do-yun turned from the window. His face was doing the thing it did when he'd already run every calculation and arrived somewhere he didn't like. Then we have a problem that's larger than Jeong-tae. He went to the library that afternoon anyway. He'd told himself he wouldn't, because the rational analysis said increased contact with Zuri was increased risk, and he was not a man who ignored rational analysis. But he drove to Rainier Central Library at 2:15 on a Friday and walked in and found her in the back room repairing a water-damaged copy of A Wrinkle in Time with a precision tool kit she clearly owned personally because the library's supply budget ran to rubber bands and hope. "You're early," she said, not looking up. "I didn't know I was expected." "You're in here 3-4 times a week, Daniel. I've started saving the good reviews for when you show up." She set down the tool, looked at him. "You look terrible. I had a difficult week. You want to talk about it?" "No," he said. Then, because honesty with her had become a habit that alarmed him in retrospect, "Not yet." She studied him for a moment. Then she reached past him to the shelf beside the door and pulled out a book, slim green cover, clearly loved, and set it on the table in front of him. "Sit down," she said. "Read this. It's short. What is it?" "The Old Man and the Sea." She picked up her repair tool again. "Sometimes when a week is terrible, you need to read about someone else having a worse time than you." He sat down. He opened the book. He read 4 pages before he looked up at her and said, "Does this actually help?" "Mostly," she said. "Sometimes it just confirms that the universe is indifferent, and you have to keep going anyway." Which is also useful information. He looked at her for a moment. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "Read Hemingway, the library. The repairs. The all of it. You could find a position somewhere that paid better, demanded less." She was quiet for a bit, fitting a page back against its binding with careful pressure. "Cameron asked me once why I liked working here," she said. He was about 9, maybe. He was going through a phase where he was asking why about everything, which was exhausting. And also the best phase he's ever had. She didn't smile, but something near it crossed her face. "I told him, because this is where the kids who don't have other options come. The kid whose parents don't have time to read to them. The kid who moves apartments 4 times in a year. The kid who needs somewhere that's the same every time they walk in." She reshelved a repaired book without looking at him. "I know what it feels like to need somewhere that stays the same." Do-yun was quiet. He thought about what it had cost her to build this constancy for other people while running perpetually on the financial edge. He thought about what it must have taken to be the steady thing for Cameron when she'd also just lost her sister. He thought about the car assassination attempt and Gyeong-tae's search query and the paper napkin in his jacket pocket. He thought about what he was. He put the book down. "Zuri," she looked up. He almost said it. He was close enough to saying it that he could feel the shape of the words, "I'm not who I've told you I am, and I need you to understand that before this goes any further." But what came out instead was, "Thank you for the sandwich. I don't think I said it properly the first time." She looked at him steadily. "You said it fine. I mean it differently now." Pause. "I know," she said, and went back to the repair. He called Seok-jin from the car. "I want eyes on the school," he said. Cameron's school, unobtrusive, rotating. Not the same face twice in a week. Seok-jin didn't ask why. "Starting when?" "Yesterday," Do-yun said. He pulled out of the library parking lot and drove toward the water because he needed to think. And the water helped him think. And he drove along the waterfront until the penthouse building came into view, and he sat in the car for a moment before going up. The decision he was not making, the one he was actively not making, each day with increasing effort, was just to walk away from Zuri entirely. To stop visiting the library. To let the gala donation stand as the ending of a brief and improbable connection between his world and hers. The rational case for this was airtight. The problem was that rationality had never before failed to be sufficient for him, and now it was insufficient, and he wasn't sure what that meant except that it was inconvenient and probably dangerous. He went upstairs. Seok-jin had left a second report on his desk. This one concerned Gyeong-tae's financial movements over the past 18 months, the diverted funds, the rerouted shipments, the shell accounts that were almost invisible until you knew to look for the pattern. Do-yun read it for 2 hours. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and understood, with the cold clarity of a man who'd built an empire precisely because he could read a situation ahead of everyone else in it, that Gyeong-tae wasn't just planning a coup. He was planning something that would leave Do-yun with no viable response, which meant Gyeong-tae needed a trigger, something to force the timeline. Something to push Do-yun into a position where his reaction was predictable. And he'd just identified, 3 days ago, exactly what that trigger was. Do-yun picked up his phone and called Seok-jin again. "Move the timeline on the counterintelligence," he said. "I want everything on Gyeongtae's Captain Network within 10 days. "That's aggressive." "Yes," Do-yun said. "It needs to be." Cameron Bellamy thought the man from the library was interesting in the specific way that adults who didn't treat him like a child were interesting. He'd met Daniel twice once, when he'd gone to pick up Zuri after school let out early, and she wasn't done with her shift. And once at the bookstore, where he'd stopped by with a friend, and found Daniel sitting in the reading corner talking to Zuri with the focused attention of someone for whom interruptions didn't exist. Both times Daniel had acknowledged him directly, asked specific questions, not the vague "what grade are you" in questions adults used as filler, but actual specific questions. About the sorting mechanism, about the YouTube channel, about what he wanted to study eventually. Cameron had given the second question real thought before answering. Mechanical engineering, he'd said, or robotics, or both. Is that too many things? Daniel had said without hesitation, no. People who are best at building things usually understand multiple systems. Cameron had spent approximately 3 days thinking about that answer. He didn't tell Zuri he thought about it. She had enough going on. He was 12, not oblivious. He told his friend Marcus instead, who said, "Sounds like she's got a boyfriend," which Cameron rejected as an analysis, because it was lazy, and also because Zuri hadn't had anything resembling a dating life since before his parents died. And the idea of her having one now was something Cameron had started to feel quietly, and with some confusion, was actually okay with him. He didn't examine this feeling closely. He wasn't ready to. Instead, he came home from school on a Tuesday and did his homework at the kitchen table and ate the snacks Zuri had left in the labeled container in the fridge and thought about mechanical engineering and said nothing about any of it. The confrontation happened in the parking structure beneath the Baekjin Pacific offices on a Wednesday evening. Do-yun had stayed later than usual, which Seok-jin had noted with the quiet concern of a man who tracked his employer's patterns as a professional survival skill. He was walking to his car when the elevator opened on the second level and Gyeongtae stepped out. Alone, which was either confidence or theater. Do-yun stopped. Gyeongtae walked toward him without hurry, hands in the pockets of his coat, expression carrying the particular neutrality of a man who'd prepared for this conversation. "You're staying late," Gyeongtae said. "Financial review," Do-yun said. "The Tacoma projections need adjustment." "I know. I reviewed them also." A pause. Gyeongtae tilted his head slightly. "The library woman." Silence. "Say what you came to say," Do-yun said. "I came to see how you are," Gyeongtae said. "We haven't talked properly in weeks." "You've been elsewhere." "I'm here now." "Are you?" Gyeongtae studied him. 8 years, Do-yun. "You've made every decision from a position of complete information. Complete control. Every weakness documented, every exposure managed." He paused. "You're creating an exposure." "I appreciate the concern," Do-yun said, with a flatness that communicated the opposite. "She's not equipped for our world. She's not in our world. She became part of it the moment her name was in a press photo next to yours." Gyeongtae's voice stayed even. Reasonable. The voice of a man having a practical business discussion. "If our competitors want to send you a message, then they would find the attempt extremely costly," Do-yun said. "Which they know." "Your competitors, yes. What about internal pressures?" The air in the parking structure was cold and smelled of oil and concrete. Somewhere 2 levels below, a car alarm cycled briefly and stopped. Do-yun looked at Gyeongtae. Gyeongtae looked back. Neither of them said the thing that was actually being said. "Internal pressures are managed," Do-yun said, "as they always are." "Good," Gyeongtae said pleasantly. "Then no problem." He turned and walked back toward the elevator. "Gyeongtae," Do-yun said. He stopped. "The Tacoma projections," Do-yun said. "The discrepancy on the third quarter report. I want it corrected and resubmitted by Friday." "A beat," of course, Gyeongtae said. "I'll have my team look at it." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Do-yun stood in the parking structure for 30 seconds before walking to his car. He called Seok Jin from the driver's seat. He's accelerating, he said without greeting. Evidence. He came to me directly. That's a man checking whether I know what he knows. Do-yun started the car. He's not testing the timeline anymore. He's starting it. How long do we have? Do-yun thought about Gyeong-tae's voice. The evenness of it. The performance of reasonableness from a man who had moved past the point of needing it. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe less. Zuri noticed something was wrong before she could name what it was. It was the quality of Daniel's attention. He'd always paid attention more than most people, in a way that she'd initially found slightly unnerving and then simply became accustomed to. But in the week after their Hemingway afternoon, there was something added to it. Something watchful, like a man who was listening to 2 conversations at once. She mentioned it on a Thursday. You're distracted, she said. They were in the reading room, late afternoon, most of the patrons gone. The light through the windows was that flat winter light that couldn't decide whether it was day or evening. I'm here, he said. Your eyes are here, you're somewhere else. She looked at him directly. What's happening with you? He was quiet for a moment that stretched just a beat too long. Work, he said. Shipping logistics, she said. Yes. She looked at him. Daniel, she said, and her voice was quiet but not soft. The voice of a woman who'd spent 4 years developing the ability to identify evasion in people who were trying to protect her from something. I've been raising a kid for 4 years. I know what it looks like when someone's not telling me something because they think they're keeping me safe. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite what he'd had there before. You're right, he said. Okay, she said so. I can't tell you yet, he said. Not because I don't trust you, because the timing I need to. He stopped. Started over. There are things I need to handle first, before I can have the honest conversation I owe you. She studied him. The refrigerator in the break room hummed faintly. Book cart squeaked somewhere in the stacks. All right, she said finally. That's it? That's not it, she said. But I'm not going to bully a confession out of you in a library on a Thursday afternoon. You have until you figure out how to say it. She turned back to her desk. Don't make me wait too long, though. I don't have a lot of patience left for people who keep things from me. He left at 5:30. She stood at the window and watched him cross the parking lot, and she thought about the way he'd said the honest conversation I owe you, which was not the language of a shipping consultant. It was the language of someone who knew exactly what the debt was. She put it away. She had Cameron's robotics competition to think about, a weekend shelf read to schedule, and a renewed supply budget to allocate, now that the gala donations had cleared. She put it away, and she went back to work. The call came 9 days later, Seok Jin's voice, not Do-yun's, which told her something was wrong before he said anything. Because she had Do-yun's number, and this was not it. Ms. Bellamy, the voice said, my name is Yoon Seok Jin. I work with Daniel Baek. I need you to listen carefully, and please do not hang up. She was at the bookstore. Late shift. The store was quiet and she was restocking returns, and her hands stopped moving. What's happened? She said. Not a question. A woman who'd gotten a call like this once. Before 2 in the morning, 4 years ago, a highway patrol officer, saying, there's been an accident, knew the shape of this kind of call, before the words filled it in. Cameron did not come home from school today, Seok Jin said. And her hands dropped to the floor. She didn't hear them land. His backpack was found near the east playground. Seok Jin continued. He is not injured. We have confirmation of that. But he is being held, and the situation involves. Where is he? She said. Her voice was completely flat. Ms. Bellamy, there is information you need to have before. Where is my nephew? She said, a pause. We don't know the exact location yet, Seok Jin said. But we will. And when we do, I need you to understand who we are and what we're capable of doing about it. A pause. What I'm about to tell you about Daniel Baek. Don't, she said. Ms. Bellamy? I said don't. She was gripping the phone so hard her hand ached. Whatever you're about to tell me about him, I already know it's going to change everything. So before you tell me, I need you to answer me one question. Yes, Seok Jin said. Can you get Cameron back? A pause. Short but real. The pause of a man who was being precise. Yes, Seok Jin said. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then tell me where to go, she said, and the night she'd spent 4 years trying to keep on the other side of the door finally walked through it. The car that picked her up was black and said nothing about itself. No plates she could read in the dark, no markings. The driver was a man in his 50s who opened the rear door without speaking and closed it behind her with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom this was simply a task, not a moment. Seok-jin was already inside. He was smaller than she'd expected from his voice. Compact, precise-looking, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of managing situations where stillness was the professional requirement. He held a phone face down in his lap, and he looked at her when she got in and he said, "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come," Zuri said. "I was retrieved." He accepted this without reaction. Car moved. She looked out the window. Seattle at night in February, wet streets, amber light smearing across the pavement, the particular loneliness of a city that keeps moving, regardless of what's happening to any individual inside it. She'd driven these streets 1,000 times. They looked completely foreign to her right now. "Tell me about Cameron first," she said. "Everything you know." "He left school at 3:17, Seok-jin said. "Standard dismissal time. He was on the east side of the building, near the secondary exit that faces Meridian. There were other students present. The abduction took approximately 40 seconds. Her jaw tightened. 40 seconds. Professional. Practiced. 2 vehicles, one to block pedestrian sightlines, one for transport. His backpack was left deliberately. It's a message, not carelessness." "A message to who?" Seok-jin looked at her steadily. "To Do-yun." She absorbed this outside the city moved past. "He's not hurt," she said. "Our information says no. The intent is leverage, not harm. Harming the boy destroys the leverage." "Your information." She turned to look at him. "How do you have information? You found out in what, an hour? Less?" "We have been monitoring Cameron's school routes for 11 days, Seok-jin said. The car was quiet. Zuri looked at him. "You've been watching my nephew," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. That particular quiet that people who knew her would have recognized as significantly more dangerous than anger. Watching over, Seok-jin said, "There's a distinction. Don't you dare make a distinction right now." Her voice stayed quiet. "You have been surveilling a 12-year-old child and his guardian without telling either of us. You identified a threat to Cameron before this happened, and you said nothing." She paused. "Why? Because informing you would have required disclosing information about Do-yun's identity that he had not yet." "Stop." She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth for a moment. Breathing. "Stop talking around it. Tell me who he is." Seok-jin looked at her with the expression of a man who had delivered bad news professionally for a very long time and had never found a version of it that was easy. "His name is Baek Do-yun," he said. "He is the head of the Baekjin organization. It is a criminal network operating primarily through international shipping and real estate along the Pacific coast. It is one of the largest Korean-American organized crime operations in the western United States." A pause. "Daniel Baek does not exist. He created that identity to visit your library without being recognized." The car went over a bridge. Water below, black and restless. Zuri said nothing for a long time. "How long have you known me?" she said finally. Not asking Seok-jin, asking the air, asking the version of the past 6 weeks that was now reassembling itself in her mind into something with a completely different shape. "He encountered you on the bus the evening of November 14th, Seok-jin said. "He requested a background report on you the following morning. He ran a background check on me. Standard procedure for—" "I know why he ran a background check on me," she said. And the worst part was that she did know. She understood exactly the calculus behind it, which was its own kind of terrible that she could follow the logic of it without excusing it. And then he came to the library. Yes, under a fake name. Yes. She pressed her head back against the seat, stared at the roof of the car. She was holding herself very still in the way she'd learned to hold herself still. When things broke, the phone call 4 years ago, the weeks after, the first morning she'd woken up and remembered all over again. You held still. You breathed. You found the next thing that needed doing, and you did it. "Where are we going?" she said. "The harbor facility. Baekjin's operational headquarters." "Does he know you called me?" He told me to bring you, Seok-jin said. After we confirmed Cameron was taken. He told you, yes. She closed her eyes briefly. And what does he want from me? He wants you safe, Seok-jin said. And he wants you to understand what's happening before it happens. She opened her eyes. What's happening? Seok-jin looked at his phone, then back at her. He's going to get your nephew back, he said. The question is what comes after. The building didn't announce itself. That was the first thing she noticed. No signs, no visible branding, nothing that said this was anything other than a mid-century waterfront commercial facility that had been extensively and expensively renovated. It sat between two larger structures on the industrial waterfront south of the port, and from the street, it looked like exactly the kind of building that professional people drove past without wondering about. The car pulled into an underground entrance, a gate that was already opening as they approached someone watching, someone who had already confirmed their arrival. The gate closed behind them before the car fully stopped. Two men were waiting when she got out. Not threatening, not positioned aggressively, but present in the specific way that men whose entire professional purpose was managing physical space were present. She'd never been around men like this before, and she felt it immediately, the weight of it, the organized attention. She followed Seok-jin through a corridor and into an elevator that required a key card she didn't have and up to a floor she wasn't counting. The doors opened into a room that stopped her for half a second, despite herself. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the entire west wall. Elliott Bay at night, the lights on the water, the dark shapes of container ships at anchor. The room itself was neither ostentatious nor sparse a working space. Large table. Several screens mounted on one wall, currently showing maps, and what looked like logistics data, chairs that were expensive but functional. And Do-yun. He was standing near the windows with his back to her, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he turned when she came in with an expression that she had never seen on him before. She'd seen him controlled, attentive, warm in the careful way of someone who hadn't been warm in a long time. She'd seen him amused, focused, occasionally troubled in a way he smoothed over before she could fully see it. She had not seen him look like this, like a man who'd been hit in a place he hadn't known he could be hit. Zuri, he said. Don't, she said. He went still. Don't say my name like that right now, she said. Like I'm something you're afraid of losing. You don't get to do that right now. He didn't defend himself. His jaw moved slightly, but no words came out. You lied to me, she said. Yes, for 6 weeks. In my library. In the place where I work and where kids come because it's supposed to be safe. She stopped. Pressed her hands flat against her thighs for a moment. You sat in my reading room and you listened to me talk about Cameron. You let me tell you about him. You laughed at things, he said. And the whole time I knew exactly what I was, he said. His voice was rough, and I didn't tell you because that room, your library, was the only place in 11 years where nobody knew what I was. Where I was just a man reading a book. He looked at her. I know that doesn't excuse it. No, she said. It doesn't. Silence. She looked at the screens on the wall. The maps. The logistics data that wasn't logistics data, she could see that now. Looking at it, without the filter of assuming he was what he'd said he was. Where is Cameron, she said. We're working on the location, Do-yun said. We have took him. A pause. My underboss, he said. Nam Gyong-tae. He's been building a move against me for almost a year. He took Cameron to force a confrontation on ground he controls. He took a 12-year-old boy, she said flatly, as a chess piece. Yes, she looked at him. And this is your world. He didn't flinch from it. She registered that, despite everything. He didn't look away, didn't qualify, didn't try to make it smaller than it was. Yes, he said, this is my world. I told you about him, she said, and her voice cracked on it, just slightly, just once. I told you he was building a sorting machine out of cardboard. I told you he wanted to study mechanical engineering. I trusted you with... She stopped. Do-yun looked like the words had landed exactly where they were supposed to and done exactly what they were supposed to do. Good, some cold part of her thought. Good, he should feel it. I'm going to get him back, Do-yun said. You're going to get him back, she repeated. Her voice was very level. The man who brought him into danger in the first place is going to get him back. Yes, and I'm supposed to trust that. No, he said, you're not supposed to trust it. You have no reason to trust anything I say right now. I'm telling you as a fact, not as something you owe me belief in. I am going to get Cameron back. What you do with that information and what you think of me after. He stopped. That's yours to decide. She stood there in the middle of this room with its waterfront view and its screens and its quietly circulating security personnel, and she thought about Cameron, at 12, building a cardboard sorting machine and explaining the engineering principles. To her, with the focused enthusiasm of a kid who'd found something he was genuinely made for. She thought about 40 seconds. What do you need from me? She said. What he needed from her was simple and awful. He needed her to wait. Seok-jin showed her to a room comfortable, removed from the operational area, with a window that looked at the building's interior courtyard rather than the water. Someone brought tea she didn't ask for, and a sandwich she didn't touch, and a phone charger that fit her phone, which told her they'd known what kind of phone she had before tonight. She sat in the chair by the window, and she thought about the gala, about Daniel standing in the middle of that ballroom with a paper napkin and talking about what power looked like when it was used to build instead of control. She understood now that the speech had been completely genuine, that Do-yun had meant every word of it, and that this made it more complicated, not less. It was easier to be angry at a lie than at a truth told by someone who was also lying about everything else. She thought about the library, the way he'd sat in the reading room and given her the entirety of his attention. The way he'd laughed when she'd said something funny, not politely, not performatively, but the real thing, surprised out of him, like he'd forgotten it was possible. She thought about Cameron asking if Daniel was coming to story hour. She put her hands over her face and sat like that for a while. Then she took her hands down and looked at the ceiling and thought about what she actually knew about this man, stripped of the identity he'd constructed. She knew how he paid attention. She knew how he laughed. She knew he'd kept a paper napkin for 3 months because someone had been kind to him without wanting anything. She knew he'd put surveillance on Cameron's school the moment he understood there was a threat, without being asked, without telling her, which was both a violation and the act of someone who understood that Cameron mattered in a way that required action, rather than conversation. None of this resolved anything. All of it was true. She was still sitting there when Seok-jin knocked, and came in 40 minutes later. "We have the location," he said. The operational briefing happened at a table with 8 people she didn't know and 1 she did. Do-yun ran it the way she imagined. He ran everything with the focused economy of someone for whom precision was not a style choice but a survival requirement. He moved through information quickly. Maps on the screens now showed a specific location, an abandoned shipyard on the industrial waterfront south of the city, decommissioned 6 years ago, currently held in a shell company that Seok-jin had traced back through 4 corporate layers to a holding entity that Gyeong-tae had established 22 months prior. He's had this planned for almost 2 years. One of the men at the table said. Zuri didn't know his name. He was younger than the others, with the watchful eyes of someone who processed information fast and said less than he knew. The location isn't improvised, Do-yun said. He knew the location before he took Cameron. Kidnapping was the trigger to set the rest in motion, not the plan itself. What's the rest? Zuri said. Everyone at the table looked at her. Some of them with the barely concealed discomfort of men who hadn't expected a civilian in the room for this. Do-yun didn't look at anyone else. He looked at her. Gyeong-tae has been positioning captains across our network for 11 months. He's built a parallel command structure loyal to him, funded through diverted Baek Do-yun money. His plan is to force a confrontation at the shipyard while his people execute simultaneous moves against our key operations. He paused. While I'm distracted with Cameron, he takes the organization. And without the organization, Seok-jin added, from his position at the end of the table, Do-yun has no resources, no leverage, and no protection. For anyone connected to him, the younger man said, and he glanced briefly at Zuri when he said it. She understood what he meant. So he doesn't just want the organization, she said. He wants Do-yun to walk into that shipyard compromised. Emotional, not thinking straight. Yes, Do-yun said. She looked at him. Because of me. A pause. Honest. Yes. She absorbed this quietly. The particular weight of knowing that your existence has been weaponized by a man you've never met, for purposes you had no part in creating. Can you counter it? She said. We're working on that now, Do-yun said. And something in the way he said it. The slight tightening around the word working told her there was a problem he hadn't said out loud yet. She looked at Seok-jin. Seok-jin looked at the table. What aren't you telling me? She said. Do-yun was quiet for a moment. We have a second problem. Inside the room, the air changed. Not dramatically, just changed. Something tightened in the space between the 8 people around the table, a quality shift, like a temperature drop, that everyone felt but nobody named. Someone in this building, Seok-jin said carefully, has been feeding Gyeong-tae our counterintelligence timeline. He knew we were closing in on his captain network. That's why he moved now, instead of in 2 weeks as we projected. Zuri looked around the table. 8 faces, none of them giving anything away. How long have you known? She asked. An hour, Do-yun said. Before or after you had me brought here? A pause. After. She understood what that meant. She was the only person in this room whose loyalty was not in question, because she'd been outside all of it until 90 minutes ago. And she also understood why Do-yun had let her stay in the briefing. She was the only person in the room he was certain was not the problem. The younger man at the end of the table shifted his weight. His name, she'd gather later, was Jin Tae-yang, and he'd been with Do-yun for 4 years, and he looked now like a man doing the math on Ona's position very rapidly. This changes the approach to the shipyard, Seok-jin said. He was looking at Do-yun. If Gyeong-tae knows our counterintelligence timeline, he knows we know about the captain moves. He'll have adjusted. He's adjusted twice already, Do-yun said. Every time we tighten, he moves. Because someone in this room tells him when we tighten. Silence. One of the men older, heavyset, who had said nothing the entire briefing, set his hands flat on the table. His name was Cha Byung-ho, Do-yun's logistics director, 17 years in the organization. Say what you mean, Do-yun. I mean that one of you has been working for Gyeong-tae, Do-yun said. His voice was completely even. And I mean that this meeting was partly designed to establish who it is. Another silence. Then Byung-ho's phone moved. Just slightly. A reflex, his hand shifted half an inch toward it and then stopped. Do-yun saw it. Everyone saw Do-yun see it. Byung-ho looked up. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows the bay moved, indifferent and dark. 17 years, Do-yun said. 15 of them good, Byung-ho said. His voice was flat, not apologetic, not afraid. The voice of a man who'd made his calculation and arrived at his position and was now simply dealing with the consequences of it being discovered. The last 2. You were going soft, Do-yun. The library. The woman. Walking away from profitable operations because you'd developed a conscience at 41. He looked at him steadily. Gyeong-tae isn't wrong about the direction of the organization. He's wrong about the method, Do-yun said. A 12-year-old boy, Zuri said. She said it quietly, and she was looking at Byung-ho, and her voice had the flat, scorched qualities of something that had burned through its fuel. He took a child. You helped a man who took a child. Byung-ho looked at her. The first time he'd looked at her directly since she'd entered the room. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. The boy wasn't supposed to be, he started. Don't, she said. Do not explain to me what was and wasn't supposed to happen to my nephew. Byung-ho went quiet. Do-yun looked at the 2 men nearest Byung-ho. A single look, nothing more. They stood. Byung-ho didn't resist. He stood when they stood, and he walked out of the room. Between them and the door closed, and the room reconfigured itself around his absence. 7 people now. He's been Gyeong-tae's primary source, Seok-jin said. He'd known, Zuri realized. Or close to known. He'd known before the meeting. Timeline leak. The counterintelligence moves all through him. Which means Gyeong-tae's adjustment to the shipyard plan is based on everything Byung-ho knew up to approximately 2 hours ago. Which is a lot. the younger man Jin Taiyang said. Yes, Seok Jin said. Do-yun stood at the head of the table and looked at the map on the screen. The shipyard, the location where a 12-year-old boy was being held in a locked building, while adults maneuvered around him like he was a coordinate on a grid. He expects me to come in angry, Do-yun said, distracted. He expects me to prioritize Cameron over strategy because he believes that's what the woman has done to me. He looked at Zuri when he said it, not apologetically, directly. Has she Taeyang said yes, Do-yun said. And no. He turned back to the map. He's right that I'll walk into that shipyard regardless. He's wrong about what I'll be thinking when I do. The simultaneous moves, Seok Jin said, against his captain network. We can still execute those. Without Byung-ho's knowledge, yes. Gyong-tae knows we identified the captains. He doesn't know the specific timing or method of the counter-moves because Byung-ho didn't have that information. So we move the captains first, Taeyang said. We move everything simultaneously, Do-yun said. The moment I enter the shipyard, Gyong-tae's attention is on me. Every captain, every account, every warehouse, we hit them all, while his focus is directed at a single point. That's clean, Taeyang said. It's the only move, Do-yun said. Seok Jin looked at the map. And Cameron? Cameron is in the storage building on the north end of the facility. We have visual confirmation from the approach survey. Do-yun looked at the screen. We go in through the east approach. Seok Jin, you take a team through the secondary entrance there, he pointed. You reach Cameron before Gyong-tae knows you're inside. And you, Zuri said. He looked at her. You walk in the front, she said. Yes, as the distraction. Yes, she looked at the map. At the shipyard. At the north end where the storage building was marked. She thought about Cameron in that building, afraid. Probably in the specific way that Cameron got afraid, which wasn't crying, wasn't falling apart, but going very quiet and very internal, the way he'd been in the weeks after his parents died. Holding it together on the outside while something cracked very slowly on the inside. What's the likelihood this works? She said. Nobody answered immediately. Hi, Seok Jin said. If the simultaneous moves on the captain network succeed in collapsing Ji-tae's support structure before he realizes what's happening, and if they don't, then it's a direct confrontation with a man who has had 2 years to prepare a single location for exactly this situation, Taeyang said. He said it with the directness of someone who thought pretending otherwise would be worse. Zuri looked at Do-yun. Do-yun looked at her. She'd spent 4 years making decisions with imperfect information and insufficient resources and no margin for error. She'd made every one of those decisions alone. She'd gotten Cameron through 4 years of grief and instability and financial tightrope walking, and she'd done it without anyone telling her the odds first. She knew what it looked like when someone was about to do something they'd decided to do regardless of the cost. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough. Before you go, she said. Yes, he said. She moved around the table, stopped 2 feet from him. Close enough that the conversation was between them only, regardless of who else was in the room. I'm not forgiving you tonight, she said. Her voice was very low. I want you to know that clearly. What you did, the lying, the fake name, bringing your world close enough to Cameron that someone could use him, I'm not setting that aside because the situation is urgent. I know, he said, but I also know, she stopped. Pressed her thumbnail into her palm for a moment, finding her footing. I know that you put people on Cameron's school before tonight. Before I asked. Before I even knew there was anything to ask about. She looked at him. I know what that means. He was very still so. Go get him, she said. And when you bring him back, we're going to have the actual conversation. Every part of it. And you're not going to manage what you tell me, or how you tell me, or how much you think I can handle. No, he said. All of it, she said. All of it, he said. She stepped back. He held her gaze for one more second, the look of a man who was storing something carefully. The way you store something, you're not sure you'll get another chance to hold, and then he turned, and the room came back into focus around them, and everything began moving. She stood at the window in her waiting room. Below, the vehicles were assembling in the underground entrance. She could hear them. The sound traveled through the structure, low vibrations through concrete and steel. Controlled movement. organized, the sound of a plan in motion. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. She thought about the bus. November. Rain. A man in a black coat with dark circles under his eyes, sitting very still in a moving vehicle full of strangers, and herself reaching across the aisle with half a turkey sandwich because he'd looked hungry and she'd had it to give. She thought about what Seok-jin had said in the car. He encountered you on the bus the evening of November 14th. He requested a background report on you the following morning. She thought about what she hadn't said to Do-yun at the table, because the timing wasn't right, and because saying it would have complicated a moment that needed to stay simple. She thought about the fact that she'd Googled Daniel Baek shipping consultant Seattle 3 weeks ago, at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No LinkedIn, no company website, no professional record of any kind. She'd told herself she was tired, that she'd searched wrong. That consultants sometimes had minimal digital footprints. She'd told herself a lot of things. The vehicles moved out below. She watched the lights disappear into the tunnel and stood there in the cold quiet of a room that belonged to a man she was furious at and couldn't stop thinking about, holding a child who needed him, in a city that had no idea any of this was happening. The bay beyond the windows moved the way it always moved. Dark, restless, and entirely indifferent to the question of what came next. The rain came back at 11:40, not the soft, ambiguous Seattle mist that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Real rain, the kind that hit horizontal when the wind came off the water, that soaked through good coats in 4 minutes and made the industrial waterfront look like the end of something. Do-yun stood outside the vehicles in the staging area, 2 blocks from the shipyard perimeter, and felt it hit his face and did not move to avoid it. Tae-yang appeared at his elbow. Teams are positioned. Seok-jin, east approach, 12 minutes out from the secondary entrance on his current pace. The captain network, 7 simultaneous moves, ready to execute on your signal. Tae-yong paused. Counts are staged. Warehouses have teams on site. The moment you give the word, Gyeong-tae's entire support structure goes dark inside of 20 minutes. Do-yun looked at the shipyard ahead. From here it was just dark geometry against a darker sky, the skeletal outlines of cranes that hadn't moved in 6 years, low industrial buildings, chain-link perimeter fencing that had been maintained well enough to suggest someone had been caring for this place in anticipation of a specific use. 2 years of preparation. He thought about Gyeong-tae sitting in that private room above the restaurant, cutting his operational timeline into careful pieces. Patient. Methodical. The man who'd told Do-yun once that the difference between a good plan and a great plan was that a great plan accounted for everything the enemy thought was his advantage. Do-yun had taught him that. How many inside, he said. Thermal imaging puts it at 14, Tae-yang said. 8 positioned around the main approach corridor. 4 with Cameron in the north building. 2 with Gyeong-tae. He'll move Cameron when I'm inside, Do-yun said. He'll want the boy visible. He'll want me to see him first, before anything else happens. So I react instead of think. So we move Seok-jin before you enter, Tae-yang said. The moment I cross the perimeter, Seok-jin moves. Not before. If Gyeong-tae's people spot Seok-jin moving before I'm through the gate, he'll know the approach is split and he'll adapt. Do-yun turned to look at Tae-yong. The sequence has to be exact. It will be. Do-yun looked at him. Tae-yang had been with him for 4 years. He was 33, fast-thinking, and had the specific loyalty of someone who'd been given a reason to be loyal rather than simply a reason to be afraid. Do-yun trusted that kind of loyalty more than the other kind, though he trusted nothing completely. You coordinated the captain moves yourself, Do-yun said. Yes, no one else touched the timing. No one, Tae-yang said. And then, understanding what was underneath the question, I know about Byung-ho. I've known something was off for 6 months. I didn't, he stopped. I should have said something earlier. Yes, Do-yun said. Not harshly, just as fact. We'll talk about it after. Tae-yang nodded. Do-yun looked at the rain on the pavement. Pooling in the low spots between the cracked asphalt, moving in thin, dark rivers toward the water. He thought about Zuri standing at the table, saying, I'm not forgiving you tonight. precision of it. The way she'd drawn the line clearly without drama. This is what I'm not doing, and this is what I'm also not doing, and here is the third thing, which is that I need you to go anyway. He'd known a lot of people in his life who've operated from fear. People who did things because the cost of not doing them was worse than the cost of doing them. He'd built an entire organizational structure on that principle. He didn't think he'd ever known anyone who operated purely from what they'd decided was right, regardless of the personal cost. He picked up his phone and called Seok-jin. 12 minutes, Seok-jin said without greeting. When you get to the north building, Do-yun said, Cameron will be scared. He may not respond well to. I know, Seok-jin said. I'll tell him you sent me. That should cover it. Tell him Zuri sent you. A pause. Yes, that's better. Do-yun ended the call. He looked at Tae-yong. Signal the captain teams. Execute in 15 minutes, simultaneous. And you? Do-yun buttoned the top button of his coat against the rain. It was a useless gesture. The coat was already soaked, but he did it anyway. I'm going in, he said. The shipyard gate was open. That was the first thing wrong with it, and Do-yun noted it with the cold attentiveness of a man who had learned to read spaces before he entered them. An open gate was an invitation. An invitation was a frame. A frame was someone else's picture. He walked through it anyway. His security team split at the perimeter, 4 men peeling left and right along the fence line to cover the exterior. Standard formation, practiced enough that it happened without instruction. Inside the gate, it was just Do-yun, and 2 men he'd chosen specifically because they were the right size for moving through tight industrial spaces without announcing themselves. The ground was broken asphalt and standing water, and something older underneath the compacted memory of industrial use. Oil and salt and metal. The rain hit it and scattered. Every surface reflected the sodium security lights that Gyeong Tae's people had installed along the main approach corridor. Lights on the approach corridor, dark everywhere else. Do-yun slowed his pace slightly, looked left. Beyond the lit corridor, the shipyard opened into a larger dark space, old dry dock infrastructure, the bones of cranes, low buildings positioned at angles that made natural choke points. Gyeong Tae had lit the path he wanted Do-yun to take. Do-yun took it, because the point was not to avoid Gyeong Tae's frame. Point was to be inside it while everything outside it collapsed. He walked down the corridor and the lights made him visible, and somewhere in the dark on either side of him, people were watching him, walk and reporting his position, and that was exactly what needed to happen right now. His phone vibrated once. Seok-jin threw the agreed signal. In position at the secondary entrance, Do-yun crossed the halfway point of the corridor. His phone vibrated twice. Tae-yang, captain teams executing. Do-yun kept walking. Inside the north building, Cameron Bellamy was doing what he'd learned to do when things were terrible. He was thinking about something else. Specifically, he was thinking about a gear reduction problem he'd been working through. For the past 2 weeks, a mechanical efficiency question related to the sorting mechanism he was rebuilding in a second iteration with actual materials instead of cardboard. He was running the calculations in his head, not because the calculations were soothing exactly, but because they required a specific kind of attention that left less room for the other things. There were 4 men in the room with him. He'd counted them twice. They weren't cruel, they hadn't touched him, hadn't threatened him directly, had given him water when he asked. But they were arranged around the room in a way that made the exits very clear, which was its own kind of threat. He didn't let himself think about Zuri. If he thought about Zuri, he would stop being able to think about anything useful, and useful was the only mode he had available to him right now. He was sitting on the floor, with his back against a metal wall that was cold through his jacket, and he was running gear calculations in his head, and he'd been doing this for 4 hours. And he was 12 years old and completely alone in a locked industrial building, and he was not going to cry about it. He was not. The door opened, not the men repositioning. A new entry. The quality of movement was different, purposeful, directed at him specifically. Cameron looked up. The man who came in was maybe 50, compact, with the kind of stillness that Cameron associated with people who were very good at their jobs, whatever their jobs were. Behind him were 2 more men. Cameron Bellamy, the man said. Yeah, Cameron said. My name is Yoon Sokjin, Zuri sent me. Cameron stared at him. He thought about the gear reduction problem for exactly one more second, filed it, and stood up. Okay, he said. Let's go. Gyeong-tae heard the report in his ear at 11:57. Do-yun had entered the main approach corridor and was moving at a controlled pace toward the central hub. No deviation, no attempt to use the dark areas on either side. Just walking, like a man who'd decided to walk. Gyeong-tae stood in the central hub, an open area between the main building and the north storage facility, covered partially by a corrugated roof that the rain drummed on in a continuous low roar, and he felt, for the first time in 11 months of careful preparation, a small and specific unease. Do-yun was walking too calmly. The boy, he said to the man beside him. Still in the north building. The team is with him. Move him here. I want him visible when Do-yun arrives. The man spoke into his radio. A pause. Longer than it should have been. Sir, the man said. His voice had changed. Gyeong-tae looked at him. North team isn't responding. The unease sharpened into something colder and more specific. Try again, Gyeong-tae said. Another pause. Longer still. Nothing, the man said. Gyeong-tae's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he recognized, one of his captains in Tacoma. 2 words were compromised. His phone buzzed again. Different number. Captain in Portland again. Seattle warehouse operation. 3 messages in 11 seconds. Each a variation of the same information, and the information was that everything he had built outside the shipyard was currently being taken apart simultaneously by people who had known exactly where to find it. He understood then the girl, the library, the paper napkin, and the ballroom speech. He'd read it correctly. Do-yun had been distracted, had been compromised by sentiment. He'd been right about that. What he'd miscalculated was that Do-yun knew he was right about it and had walked into the shipyard anyway, and the sentiment was not the distraction. The sentiment was the frame, and Do-yun had used it to point Gyeong-tae's attention in exactly one direction, while everything else moved. He looked up. Do-yun walked out of the approach corridor into the hub. He was soaking wet and completely unhurried, and he looked at Gyeong-tae with an expression that was not anger, not triumph, not any of the things Gyeong-tae had a prepared response for. Just attention. The focused, total attention of a man who had already done what needed doing and was now simply completing the final step. Your captains are done, Do-yun said. Conversational. Status update. Gyeong-tae's jaw tightened. The boy is being brought to his aunt, Do-yun said. He was never your move, Gyeong-tae. He was your mistake. Something moved across Gyeong-tae's face. Not panic, he was too disciplined for panic, but the recalibration of a man whose entire operational framework had just been invalidated, and who was now running hard on instinct. He had 6 men in the hub. Do-yun had walked in with 2. The math still worked. The math was the only thing that still worked. Take him, Gyeong-tae said. The 2 men flanking Do-yun moved first not toward Gyeong-tae's men, but laterally, creating angles, and the hub erupted into something that was less a fight than a controlled collision of people who knew exactly what they were doing on both sides. Do-yun moved through it, not around the edges. Through. Because Gyeong-tae was in the center, and Gyeong-tae was the point, and everything else was peripheral. And Do-yun had made the decision, before he entered the gate, that the most dangerous version of tonight was any version, where Gyeong-tae stayed operational. A man came at him from the left. Do-yun caught the arm, redirected the momentum, and the man went sideways into a support column with a sound that ended his participation. Do-yun didn't stop moving. Gyeong-tae had pulled back toward the far wall. He had something in his hand, not a weapon, a phone, and he was looking at the screen with the expression of a man watching water drain out of a vessel he'd spent 2 years filling. It's gone, Do-yun said, reaching him. All of it. The accounts, the warehouses, the captain network. Everything you built over 11 months. Gyeong-tae looked up from the phone. His face had settled into something flat and hard and honest, in a way that his face very rarely was. You knew about Byung-ho, he said. I identified him 3 hours ago. But you suspected earlier. Months earlier, Do-yun said. I let him stay because he was more useful as a controlled leak than as a confirmed traitor in custody. Gyong stared at him. Processing, you fed him false timelines. Partially false. The captain identification was real. Counter move timing was not. Do-yun looked at him steadily. He told you we were closing in on the captains. He couldn't tell you when we'd move, because we hadn't decided yet. Which meant your adjustment was based on incomplete information. The woman, Gyong-tae, said, "You let me think she was the distraction." "She wasn't a distraction," Do-yun said. "That part was completely real." Gyong-tae looked at him with something that in different circumstances might have been respect. "You used your own weakness as a weapon." "I used your assumption about my weakness," Do-yun said. "That's different." From somewhere outside the hub, through the rain, there were sounds movement, controlled, organized. Taeyang's teams coming through the perimeter, the exterior closing in. Gyong-tae heard it. He looked towards the sound and then back at Do-yun, and in his expression was the arithmetic of a man who had counted everything and found the sum unacceptable. 8 years, he said. "Yes," Do-yun said. "You built something worth taking." "You should have said that differently," Do-yun said. "You should have said I built something worth keeping." Gyong-tae looked at the phone in his hand. The screen showed a cascade of failed connections. Captains going dark, accounts frozen. The architecture of 11 months of construction folding in on itself in real time. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Do-yun. "What happens now?" he said. Do-yun was quiet for a moment. The rain on the corrugated roof. The sounds of Taeyang's teams entering the perimeter. Somewhere in the north part of the shipyard, a door had opened and closed. "Now you're done," Do-yun said, "and I'm taking you in." Something crossed Gyong-tae's face at the word in. Not the word he'd been expecting. "In," he said. "Not." "You took a child," Do-yun said. "You crossed a line that doesn't have a version of this that ends any other way." He paused. "The evidence against you is comprehensive. 18 months of financial diversion. The assassination attempt. The kidnapping." Another pause. "You're done, Gyong-tae. But you're done through the right channel." Gyong-tae had absorbed this. He looked at Do-yun with an expression that had moved past calculation into something more fundamental, the look of a man confronting the actual distance between what he'd planned and where he'd arrived. "You're going to hand me to the authorities," he said. "Yes, and the organization?" Do-yun said nothing. Gyong-tae's eyes moved slightly, reading Do-yun's silence the way you read a long-practiced face. And something there told him not a guess, a read. The read of a man who'd spent 8 years inside Do-yun's operational logic, that the organization question was more complicated than tonight. "Something's changing," Gyong-tae said. Do-yun looked at him. "Whatever she is to you," Gyong-tae said, and his voice had lost its professional flatness, for the first time, had something underneath it that was almost not almost. Was tired. "Whatever it is that a library and a turkey sandwich apparently did to you." He stopped. "It matters more than the organization." It wasn't a question. Do-yun didn't answer it. Taeyang came through the hub entrance with 4 men and stopped when he saw Do-yun and Gyong-tae standing 3 feet apart, both wet. The fight resolved without him. "Cure him," Do-yun said. "Everything documented. I want his counsel notified within the hour." Taeyang nodded to his men. They moved to Gyong-tae, who went with them without resistance, the specific passivity of a man who had identified the exact moment when resistance stopped being rational. Do-yun's phone rang. He answered. "He's with me," Seok-jin said. "He's all right." Do-yun turned away from the room. Put his free hand over his mouth for a moment. Breathed. "He's asking," Seok-jin continued, "whether you actually know how gear reduction ratios work, or whether you were just agreeing with him to be polite." Do-yun made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Tell him," he stopped. "Tell him we'll discuss it. He says he'll require a demonstration." "Tell him fine." He ended the call. Stood in the rain-loud hub with the debris of the fight and the gutted remains of Gyong-tae's operation around him, and felt something he couldn't name move through him. Not relief exactly, because relief implied he'd been afraid, and he'd been too focused to be afraid, but something adjacent to it. The specific decompression of a structure that had been holding itself rigid against a pressure that was now gone. He was wet, and his shoulder hurt from a collision he'd barely registered during the movement through the hub. And there was a cut on his left hand from something he hadn't identified, and he would need to go through approximately 4 hours of operational debrief before the night was over. He walked out of the hub into the rain. The medical clinic Seok-jin had arranged was 12 minutes from the shipyard. Not a hospital, a private facility, clean and discreet, staffed by people whose professional flexibility was compensated generously. Cameron was there when Do-yun arrived, seated on an examination table, jacket still on, eating a package of crackers from a vending machine with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been not eating for 6 hours and was making up for it. He looked up when Do-yun came in. Do-yun stopped in the doorway. Cameron looked at him, at the wet coat, at the cut hand, at the general condition of a man who'd just come from somewhere difficult. "You got him," Cameron said. "Yes," Do-yun said. "Gyeong-tae." "Yes." Cameron ate another cracker, looked at him with the assessing intelligence of someone who was 12, and also not exactly 12. "Seok-jin told me some of it. In the car." "What did he tell you?" "That you're not a shipping consultant." A pause. "That Daniel isn't your name." "No," Do-yun said. "It isn't. Your name is Do-yun." "Baek Do-yun, yes." Cameron looked at the crackers. "Look back up. Zuri doesn't know yet." "She knows now," Do-yun said. "She's been told everything." A silence. "Is she okay?" Cameron said. Do-yun considered the word. "She's Zuri." Cameron seemed to find this an adequate answer. He ate the last cracker and crumpled the package. "She's going to be really mad at you." "Yes," Do-yun said. "For a long time, probably." "Yes." Cameron looked at him steadily. With the eyes of a kid who'd lost his parents at 7 and had spent 5 years watching adults manage grief and responsibility and things they hadn't chosen, and had developed out of that, watching a specific and accurate ability to see people more clearly than they sometimes saw themselves. "But you came anyway," Cameron said, even knowing that. Do-yun didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said finally. Cameron nodded, like this was a data point he was filing. Like it confirmed something he'd been working out. "Okay," he said. The door opened behind Do-yun. He knew before he turned. Zuri came through the door, and she looked at Cameron first, only Cameron, for a full 3 seconds. The inventory of a woman confirming with her own eyes what she'd been told was true, and Cameron slid off the examination table, and she crossed the room and pulled him against her chest and held on. Cameron let her. He, even after a moment, put his arms around her back. Over his shoulder, she looked at Do-yun. She was exhausted and furious, and her eyes were wet in the specific way of someone who'd been holding it together through will and had now reached the end of the requirement. She looked at Do-yun, and she didn't say anything. He looked back at her, and he didn't say anything either. Some conversations didn't start in the moment you found each other. They started later, when the immediate crisis had passed and the silence had room in it for honesty, and both people were ready to stop managing and start saying what was actually true. Do-yun looked at the two of them, Zuri holding Cameron, Cameron holding on. The ordinary, extraordinary sight of people who'd chosen each other, staying chosen even after the ground had fallen out. And he felt something move in his chest that he'd spent 41 years building the exact structures to prevent. He looked away. Outside the clinic window, Seattle was still raining, still dark, still moving indifferently through its night. And somewhere across the city, in a 14-story building and a Tacoma port operation and 3 warehouse facilities, the careful architecture of 11 months of betrayal was being dismantled piece by methodical piece. And in a waterfront headquarters that still smelled of salt and old concrete, in a room that overlooked Elliott Bay, a paper napkin sat folded on a table beside a chair where a man had sat reading a Hemingway novel on a Thursday afternoon and laughed when a librarian told him the universe was indifferent. Do-jun stood in the doorway of a medical clinic and watched the only people who made that fact feel survivable hold on to each other in the fluorescent light. And he understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that the next conversation, the real one, all of it, no management was either going to cost him everything he had left or give him something he had no language yet for wanting. The drive back to the waterfront headquarters took 19 minutes. Nobody talked. Seok-jin drove. Cameron sat in the back between Zuri and the window, and he'd fallen asleep somewhere around the 10-minute mark, the specific crash of a 12-year-old body that had been running on adrenaline for 6 hours and had finally received permission to stop. His head was against Zuri's shoulder, and his breathing had gone deep and even, and his hands were loose in his lap. Zuri looked out the window. Do-yun sat in the front passenger seat and looked at the road ahead and said nothing. The city moved past, still raining, still indifferent. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. A few late-shift workers, a delivery truck, the scattered lights of people awake in buildings, for reasons nobody outside those buildings would ever know. At one point, Seok-jin's radio produced a burst of static and a voice Tae-yang, reporting that the last of the Captain Network confirmations had come in. All 7 simultaneous moves successful. Jeongtae's financial infrastructure was frozen. The evidence package was being assembled for legal transfer. Seok-jin acknowledged, and the radio went quiet again. Zuri said nothing throughout this. She looked at the reflection of the city in the wet window, and she held very still because Cameron was asleep against her, and she didn't want to disturb him. And the stillness gave her something to do with her body, while her mind ran at a speed she couldn't slow down. She was thinking about a lie that lasted 6 weeks. She was thinking about a man who'd run a background check on her before he introduced himself. She was thinking about Cameron's backpack near an empty playground in 40 seconds, and a man she'd never met deciding over lunch that a child was a useful tool. She was thinking about the way Do-yun had looked at her over Cameron's shoulder in the medical clinic. Not asking for anything, not managing her reaction, just looking. The way you look at something when you've accepted that you might not get to look at it much longer. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself, standing in a hospital corridor 4 years ago, watching a door that wasn't going to open. The car stopped at the gate. They put Cameron in the room she'd waited in. He didn't fully wake up when they moved him, just enough to register the change, to accept the blanket Seok-jin produced from somewhere, to sink back into sleep on the couch with the total commitment of someone whose body had made a unilateral decision. Zuri stood in the doorway of that room and looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned. Do-yun was in the corridor, giving her space. He'd changed at some point. Different shirt, the wet coat gone. His left hand had been wrapped. He looked like a man who'd been through something and had dealt with the surface evidence of it without dealing with the rest yet. "There's a room with better chairs," he said, "if you want to talk." "I want to talk here," she said, "where I can see him." He nodded, moved to stand beside her in the doorway. Not crowding her. 3 feet of space between them that felt like a considered distance. They both looked at Cameron for a moment. His face in sleep had lost the careful management he maintained, while awake the performance of competence that she recognized because she'd been doing her own version of it since she was 26. In sleep, he looked exactly 12. He asked me, Do-yun said quietly, whether I actually understood gear reduction ratios, or whether I was agreeing with him to be polite. "What did you tell him?" "That we'd discuss it, do you?" "Some of it," Do-yun said. "Enough to have an honest conversation. Not enough to have impressed a mechanical engineer." Zuri looked at Cameron's sleeping face. "He's been thinking about you," she said. "More than he told me. He mentioned you twice in passing, and then changed the subject, which is what he does when something matters enough that he's not ready to talk about it." Do-yun said nothing. "He doesn't do that with people who don't mean something to him," she said. Pause. "Zuri?" "I'm not done," she said. Her voice was quiet but had an edge to it, the edge of someone who'd been holding a specific conversation together in their head for several hours and needed to deliver it intact. "I need to say this in the right order, or it won't come out right," so he said. She looked at Cameron another moment. Then she stepped back from the doorway, leaving the door open enough to hear him, and she moved down the corridor to where the wall met a window, and she stopped there and turned. Do-yun followed, stopped at the same distance he'd maintained before. "The lying," she said. "I need you to understand what that cost. Not what it cost me in the abstract, what it specifically cost." She looked at him directly. "I told you things about Cameron because I trusted you. I told you about what he was like before, what he was like in the months after his parents died. I told you about the flashlight under the covers in the robotics channel, and the first time he laughed properly. About 8 months in really laughed, not the polite version. She paused. Those are things I haven't told most people. Because I protect him. It's the main thing I do. I know, Do-yun said. And you received all of that under false pretenses, she said. You were not Daniel Baek, the shipping consultant. You were a man running a criminal organization who had already had me investigated before we had our first real conversation. And everything I gave you voluntarily, you already had from a file. Not everything, he said. What you told me was… He stopped. Different. I know it's different, she said. That's why it mattered that you took it under a false name. He was quiet. I Googled you, she said, 3 weeks ago. 2 in the morning. I knew something was off. I'd known for a while. And I found nothing, and I told myself I'd searched wrong, because the alternative was that the person I was. She stopped. Pressed her hand flat against the wall. The alternative required me to know something I wasn't ready to know. I should have told you, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. Much earlier than the night someone took Cameron. Yes. She looked at him. In the corridor light, he looked tired in a way that went deeper than one difficult night, the tired of a man who'd been managing a particular kind of a loan for a very long time, and had recently discovered, at considerable personal cost, that he was not actually built for it the way he'd thought. Why the library, she said. You had the file. You knew where I worked. You could have found a reason to meet me anywhere. Why did you keep coming back to the library? He was quiet for a long moment. Because it was the only place I've been in 11 years where nobody knew what to be afraid of, he said. Nobody moved differently when I came in. Nobody was managing their response to me. Nobody, he stopped. You told me to sit down and read Hemingway because you thought it would help. Not because you wanted something. Not because you were calculating what it would get you. He looked at her. I don't know how to explain what that feels like from where I was standing. I'm not sure I have the language for it. Try, she said. He looked at the window at the end of the corridor, at the dark water beyond it, like being a person instead of a position, he said. Like the space between what I was and what I'd built had briefly closed. He turned back to her. I kept coming back because I couldn't find a version of stopping that didn't feel like a specific kind of loss I wasn't prepared for. She absorbed this. She was not softening. She could feel herself not softening. The boundary was still exactly where she'd drawn it, but she was also listening, which was the thing she'd promised herself she'd do. Listen to the whole thing before deciding what to do with it. Paper napkin, she said. He reached into the pocket of the clean shirt. He'd transferred it. Of course he had. He held it out. She looked at it but didn't take it. It was wrecked by now, soft with handling, the paper almost translucent in places, the original sharp fold lines long gone into something organic and shapeless. Piece of trash that had survived 11 months of a man carrying it because he couldn't explain why putting it down felt wrong. You kept that, she said. Yes. Why, he looked at the napkin in his hand. Because on the worst night of a very bad year, a woman I'd never met gave me the only thing she had to give without wanting anything back. And I've spent a long time in a world where nothing moves without a motive. He looked up at her. I didn't know what to do with something that had no motive. I still don't entirely. But I knew I didn't want to lose the evidence that it had happened. The corridor was quiet. From the room down the hall, Cameron made a small sound in his sleep, not distress, just adjustment, and then went quiet again. Zuri looked at the napkin for another moment. Then she looked at Do-yun. I need 6 months, she said. He went still. Not from you necessarily, she said. Just from this. From all of it. Cameron has to go back to something that looks like normal. He has to go back to school and robotics and Saturday story hour and the life I spent 4 years building for him. And he can't do that if I'm… She stopped. If I'm anywhere near whatever the aftermath of tonight looks like. I understand, Do-yun said. I'm not saying never, she said. I want to be precise about that. I'm saying Cameron has already lost his parents. I cannot ask him to absorb this also. Not right now. Not until I know what right now looks like on the other side of it. Do-yun was looking at her with that expression, the one from the medical clinic, the one that wasn't asking for anything. Just holding something carefully. What are you going to do? She said. With Baek Do-yun. I don't know yet, he said. I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to hand it to someone else and call it restructuring and keep running the same operations through new management. That would be, he stopped, cowardice with better paperwork. And honestly, he looked at her. Honestly, there's a version of this where the legitimate businesses survive and the rest doesn't. Where I spend the next 2 years doing things that are difficult and expensive and probably professionally humiliating. And at the end of it, I'm either a legitimate businessman or I'm in a courtroom. He paused. I'm not certain which yet. I'm certain I'm done with the version I've been running. Because of tonight, she said. Because of a lot of things, he said. Tonight confirmed them. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the bus. November, the rain. She thought about the careful way she'd torn the sandwich. The specific assessment she'd made in the 2 seconds before she held it out. This person needs this, and I have it to give. And how that assessment had been the most ordinary thing in the world, to her, and had apparently been something else entirely to the man across the aisle. She thought about what it meant that the first person in 11 years to treat Baek Do-yun like a regular human being had been a tired librarian with a bad left shoe and no money for a sandwich bag. She thought about what Cameron had said. But you came anyway. Even knowing that. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again. 6 months, and in 6 months, if Cameron is okay and stable, and if you've done what you said, she paused. We talk again. All of it. Honestly, with no management and no protection of what I can handle, because I've handled everything so far, and I'll handle whatever comes next. Yes, he said. And if in 6 months you haven't done what you said, then you'll know, he said, and that'll be its own answer. She nodded. She took the napkin from his hand. She looked at it, this ruined, overhandled piece of cheap paper that had somehow become the most precise object in both their lives, and she folded it once, cleanly, and handed it back. Keep it, she said. Until we talk again. Then I want it back. Took it. His hand closed around it carefully. The way you close your hand around something small you're afraid of dropping. Go home, she said. Cameron and I are going to be here until it's light. Seok-jin can take us back in the morning. I'll arrange it, he said. Then go do your debrief and your legal arrangements and whatever else you have to do tonight. And let me sit with my nephew. He looked at her one more time. Then he turned and walked down the corridor and did not look back, which she understood was not coldness, but the opposite, a man who knew that turning around would be asking for something she'd already told him she couldn't give right now, and who had enough respect for the line she'd drawn to honor it, even when it cost him. She watched him go. Then she went back to the room and sat in the chair nearest the couch and watched Cameron sleep, and finally let herself be as tired as she actually was. 6 months. They moved faster and slower than she expected, the way time always did when you were waiting for something you weren't sure would arrive. Cameron went back to school the following Monday. He didn't tell anyone what had happened, partly because she'd asked him not to, partly because the story had no shape he could explain to a 7th grader without it sounding like something he'd invented. He carried it internally, which she watched him do with the specific attention of someone who'd learned to distinguish between the healthy processing of hard things and the unhealthy compression of them. He was doing the first one, she could tell, because he talked to her. Not about the shipyard or Gyeongtae or the locked storage building, not directly, but in the way that people who are working through something return to it sideways, in small, related questions, in conversations that were about something else, and also about the thing. He asked her, 2 weeks after, whether she thought people could actually change. Not as a philosophical question, she'd heard him ask those, and they had a different quality. This was specific. I think some people can, she said. I think it costs something. I think the ones who do it without being forced to are rarer than the ones who do it because they ran out of other options. He thought about this. What's the difference? In the outcome. Sometimes nothing, she said. Sometimes everything. He ate his cereal. Do you think he is? Changing. She'd been ready for this question. She'd been ready for it since the night in the corridor, and she'd thought about what the honest answer was. I think he's trying, she said. I think I don't know yet whether trying is enough. Cameron nodded, filed it, went back to his cereal and whatever he was building in his head. She went to work. The library in the weeks after was the same and different in the way things were when you'd been changed inside them. She reselved the same books. She ran story hour. She repaired the same quality of damaged spines with the same tools at the kitchen table after Cameron was in bed. She covered the same fees for the same kinds of families and stayed late for the same reasons and ate the same quality of packed lunch because the budget hadn't changed. She did not hear from Do-yun. She'd told him 6 months, and he was giving her 6 months, and she was grateful for it, and also found the silence harder than she'd expected, which told her something she didn't particularly want to know, but filed away as information. She Googled him now. His actual name, not the invented one. What came up was a mixture of legitimate business coverage, Baek Do-yun Pacific in the financial press, shipping logistics profiles, a piece in a Pacific Coast trade publication about consolidation in the port services sector, and, beginning around the 8-week mark, something different. Federal cooperation story. She read it twice. It was careful, legally careful, the language of an ongoing process, a prominent Seattle shipping executive cooperating with federal authorities in a criminal conspiracy investigation, details not disclosed. Significant organizational changes underway at Baek Do-yun Pacific's holding company. No arrest, no trial date. A process. She put her phone face down on the desk. She sat there for a moment. Then she got up and went back to work because the afternoon story hour started in 20 minutes, and she'd promised the kids a chapter of the Phantom Toll Booth, and she did not break promises to children. Beverly called her into the office in March. Beverly was 61, had run the Rainier Central Library for 16 years, and had the particular combination of warmth and total institutional competence that made her either the best or the most exhausting person to work for, depending on the day. Zuri had mostly found her the best. "Sit down," Beverly said. Zuri sat. Beverly put a folder on the desk between them. Zuri opened it. The letter was from a foundation she'd never heard of, the Bellamy Pacific Literacy Initiative, registered in Washington State 4 months ago. The letter outlined an endowment. The number in the endowment was large enough that Zuri read it twice and then looked at Beverly. "It came in 6 weeks ago," Beverly said. "I've had legal and accounting verify it 3 ways. It's real. It's clean. It's designated specifically for the Rainier program and for expansion of mobile library services countywide." Zuri looked at the number again. "There's a secondary designation," Beverly said. She turned the page. "A scholarship fund for students in the county pursuing degrees in engineering or library science." Zuri looked at the scholarship fund name. Cameron Bellamy Memorial Scholarship was what she'd expected. It wasn't that. It was the Cameron Bellamy Future Engineers Fund. Not Memorial. Future. She put the folder down. "Zuri," Beverly said, in the specific gentle tone she used when she thought someone might need a minute. "I'm fine," Zuri said. She pressed the back of one knuckle against her lower lip for a moment. "I'm fine. She stopped. "I need a minute." "Take it," Beverly said. She took it. She thought about the difference between a gesture made to buy something and a gesture made to say something. She thought about a man who'd spent 4 months doing difficult and expensive things before asking for anything in return. She thought about the specific choice of future instead of the word that would have made it about loss. She thought about a boy who wanted to study mechanical engineering, who was alive and in school and building a second iteration of a sorting mechanism with actual materials. For a minute. Then she picked up the folder and looked at Beverly. "What do we need to do to accept it?" Beverly smiled. Not the wide official smile she used for donors. The real one. "I'll handle most of it. You just need to sign a few things and be available for a photo for the foundation's press release." "Fine," Zuri said. "When?" "There's a spring literacy gala," Beverly said. "The foundation wants to make the official announcement there. They've asked whether you'd be willing to be present." Zuri looked at her. Beverly's expression was entirely professional. "When is it?" Zuri said. "May 17th, Beverly said. A Saturday 17th. Was 4 days past the 6-month mark. Zuri looked at the folder, at the scholarship name. The number that meant Cameron could study what he wanted to study without her lying awake, doing financial math in the dark. Yes, she said, I'll be there. The gala was at the same hotel. Different season May instead of February, the waterfront transformed from that gray winter hostility into something almost forgiving. The evening was clear, the kind of clear that Seattle produced occasionally in spring, as if to remind everyone why they stayed, and the light on the water was long and gold. Zuri wore her own dress this time. She'd bought it 2 weeks earlier with money from the first month's Les Librairies stipend that the endowment had freed up a deep burgundy, nothing elaborate, but hers. She'd asked Cameron whether she looked okay before she left, and he'd looked at her, with the expression he'd been using lately, the one that was slightly older than 12, and said, "You look good." Zuri, in a tone that also communicated, obviously, "Stop asking," and she'd laughed and taken the car. She arrived on time. The room was the same architecture, the same class of people, the same category of self-congratulatory philanthropy dressed as civic virtue. She didn't feel the same way about it that she'd felt in February. She'd been through too much since February to feel contempt for a room full of people spending their money on something real, whatever their reasons. She found Beverly. She greeted the foundation's legal representative, a woman named Park Ji-yeon, who had a handshake like a vice and spoke with the compressed efficiency of someone who billed by the minute. She did not look at the door. At 7:45, the program began. Beverly spoke about the library's expansion plans. County Commissioner said the appropriate things. Ji-yeon presented the formal endowment announcement with the flat competence of a woman who did this often and did it well. Then there was a pause. The MC said, "The anonymous donor responsible for this foundation has asked to make a brief statement." Zuri went still. She was at a table near the front, and she did not turn around. She heard the room shift. That particular quality of collective attention that happens when someone enters a space and everyone feels it simultaneously. She heard footsteps. She turned. He was alone, no security visible. No Sok-jin, no Tai-yang, no motorcade or advance team or any of the organized infrastructure she'd glimpsed on that one night in a waterfront building that felt a long time ago. Just Do-yun, in a dark suit, no tie. His hair slightly different than she remembered, shorter, which made him look simultaneously older and less guarded. He looked like a man who'd had a difficult 6 months, and had come out the other side of them, changed in ways he was still discovering. Not that's no. He looked like himself. He walked to the microphone. He looked at the room. Then he looked at her. "In November," he said, "on a city bus, a woman gave me half of a turkey sandwich. She didn't know me. She didn't want anything. She saw someone who looked like they needed it, and she had it to give." He paused. "I've spent my adult life in an industry where nothing moves without a motive, where every transaction has a structure and every relationship has a cost. What that woman did on a Tuesday night on a public bus broke something in me that I didn't know needed breaking." The room was completely quiet. This foundation exists because she showed me what it looks like when resources are used to build things instead of control them. What it looks like when you decide that the kids who don't have options deserve the same access to stories and ideas and future as the kids who do. He looked at Zuri. "I can't give anyone their options back, but I can make sure the next generation in this county has more of them." He stepped back from the microphone. The room began to applaud. He didn't wait for it to finish. He moved through the tables toward her, and the people who tried to intercept him, and several did, politicians and executives, with the practiced forward lean of people who needed to attach themselves to something significant, he moved past with a courtesy that was final. Polite. Absolute. He stopped at her table. She looked up at him. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He looked at the chair beside her. "May I?" She pulled it out. He sat. The applause finished around them. The room moved on to its next scheduled moment with the relentless forward momentum of organized events. Plates arrived. Glasses were refilled. Somewhere a string quartet began. Zuri looked at the water through the windows. "The federal cooperation," she said. "Ongoing," he said. "It's going to take another year at least. Possibly 2. The legal process is slow and expensive and occasionally humiliating as predicted. And Baekjin Pacific, under professional management. I'm a shareholder, not an operator." He looked at his water glass. "The other parts of the organization are being dismantled. Some of it through cooperation, some of it through other means. He paused. Not clean. It's not going to be clean. There's no version of something like that that ends cleanly. But it's ending. Yes, he said. It's ending. She nodded. Cameron, he said. He's good. He submitted an application last week to a summer engineering program at the university. Full scholarship eligible. She paused. He asked me this morning whether you were going to be at the gala. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. What did he say? She looked at Do-yun. He said, and I'm quoting, someone should probably tell him that story hour is on Saturdays, and it starts at 10 and he should bring a snack because it runs long. Do-yun made a sound, that real one, surprised out of him. The one she'd heard in the library and nowhere else. She felt something ease in her chest. Not everything. Not the whole weight of everything that had happened between November and now. But something. I owe you a conversation, he said. All of it, no management. Yes, she said, you do. Tonight isn't the right time. No, she said, but soon. Soon, he agreed. She looked at him. At the shorter hair and the absence of the security infrastructure and the suit without a tie and the ways in which he looked like the same man she'd watched cross a ballroom in February to stand beside a borrowed dress, and the ways in which he looked like someone who'd been through a 6-month reshaping and was still finding his edges. She reached into her bag. She put the paper napkin on the table between them. He looked at it. She'd kept it. She'd had it for 6 months in her bag, then in the kitchen drawer beside the overdue bill that wasn't overdue anymore, then back in her bag. She pushed it toward him. I told you I wanted it back, she said. I want it back, but not to keep. I want you to hold it until we've had the conversation, and then she paused. And then I want to put it in the library, in the display case near the front entrance, where we put things that mean something about why this place exists. She looked at him. Because that's what it is. It's not a love letter. Proof that ordinary kindness can do something you can't predict. And that's the thing the kids who come here should know about. Do-yun looked at the napkin. He picked it up, held it the same way he always held it carefully, with a consciousness of its fragility that was out of proportion to what it actually was. All right, he said. Outside the windows, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings in Seattle occasionally did, which was to be exactly as good as everyone forgot they could be in the long months of gray. The light on the water was going gold to amber, the kind of transition that happened slowly enough that you had to watch for it or miss it entirely. They sat with it for a moment. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay, she said. At the medical clinic, he said. When you looked at me over Cameron's shoulder, he paused. You looked at me like you'd already decided something. She was quiet for a moment. I'd decided I wasn't going to make a decision that night, she said. Which is its own kind of decision. She looked at him. I decided I wasn't going to let the worst night do the deciding for me. That whatever I felt about you, however angry I was, however much She stopped. Started over. I was going to let the 6 months happen and see what the 6 months said. And what do they say? He said. She looked at the napkin in his hand. The bay beyond the windows. She thought about a bus in November rain. She thought about a man who'd carried a piece of trash for months because it was evidence of something he couldn't name. She thought about a scholarship fund that said future instead of memorial. She thought about Cameron asking whether Do-yun was coming to story hour with a grin on his face like he'd already decided the answer should be yes. She thought about what it cost to trust something after you'd been given reasons not to. She thought about what it cost not to. They say, she said carefully, that I'm not ready to be done with this. He was very still. With the conversation, she clarified. The real one. All of it. I want to have it. So do I, he said. Not tonight, she said. But Saturday. He looked at her. Story hour starts at 10, she said. Cameron said to bring a snack because it runs long. And after she paused. After you and I are going to sit in the reading room, and you're going to tell me everything. Every part you've managed, and every part you've protected me from, and every part you've been afraid of saying. She looked at him directly. And I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to tell you what I think. And we're going to figure out, between the two of us, whether what's left is enough to build on. It might be a long conversation, he said. Then we'll need good chairs, she said. which we have. It's a library. He looked at her for a long moment. In the gold-going amber light from the windows, he looked like someone who'd been given something, stopped believing he was allowed to want, and was still in the process of understanding that the offer was real. Saturday said. 10 o'clock, she said, and Do-yun. Yes. Bring something good. Cameron's been on a peanut butter kick, but he'll eat anything that isn't kale. He nodded seriously. I'll research it. She picked up her water glass. Don't research it. Just bring something you'd want. That's usually what works with him. He looked at her. She looked back. Outside, the last of the evening light moved across the water, and the city held itself in that brief, specific equilibrium between day and night when everything was equally possible, and nothing had been decided yet. The napkin sat in his hand. The library was 3 miles away, dark and locked and full of stories waiting for Saturday morning, and whoever would walk through its doors next. And in a room that smelled like old paper and floor wax, and the specific accumulated quiet of a place where people came to find things they couldn't find anywhere else, a small display case near the front entrance sat empty, waiting to hold something worth keeping.